Hello, everyone. My name is Sonia from Quest, and I'd like to welcome you to today's Reconnect Deep Dive session. I have a few reminders before we get started. Attendees will remain muted throughout the session. However, if you'd like to be unmuted to ask a question, raise the hand feature. Attendees can also type their questions into the Q&A module in your Zoom toolbar. We will address any questions at the end of the session. At this time, I'd like to turn things over to our speaker, Randall. Thank you.
Sonia, thank you so much. I hope everyone is enjoying the deep dive virtual conference. This is already my second presentation. I've got one more today, and then only one tomorrow and one on Thursday. And excited to be a part of it once again. I see folks are joining. I'm going to go ahead and dive in, and then as Sonia said, we're going to use the question and answer section. Please feel free to throw your questions out there. I've got a split screen, so I'll do my best to see if any new questions pop up. I'll try to answer them as they come in, but there will be, I'm certain, time at the end of the session. So if I miss any, we'll be able to circle back and get all your questions answered. All righty. All right, so it looks like, yep, a bunch of you have joined. I know there's a lot of content during this hour, and I appreciate you coming to the Procure to Pay optimization. My name is Randy Johnson, and I'm going to be presenting today on this topic, a case study that we did, and it is actually ongoing at Hackensack in Hackensack, New Jersey. This is me. Younger version of me. That's my real email. That's my real phone number. And I am actually not in Chicago. I'm in the northern suburbs of Chicago, up in Vernon Hills, Illinois. If you want to reach me, either of these will work. I'll pick up the phone. I may have to listen to a voicemail, but I'll get back to you. Send me an email. Either way, I promise I will get back to you. Normally, I'd be joined by my partner from Hackensack Meridian Health, which I will abbreviate going forward as HMH. I do that almost always without even telling you what HMH stands for. Gary Wilhelm, so he's the Vice President of Business Applications. We've been partnering with HMH on a number of initiatives over the last several years. In fact, my previous presentation was on the mobile expenses implementation that we did at HMH back in 2019, before the COVID experience affected us all. So this is Gary. Gary is, I don't think was on. I checked and we don't have him on. So I'll be pinch hitting for Gary, and there won't be a live demo, but I think I've done a decent job of patching it together so that you can see what the solution looks like that we've developed so far. And then I'll talk about the future phase that we have planned. Hackensack is all in on PeopleSoft, just like SpearMC is. And any chance we get to deploy functionality or a module that fits within the business process, we're focused through Hackensack's IT leadership to using the PeopleSoft functionality to its fullest, and minimizing any outside systems or integrations. They're not possible to eliminate completely, are they? We are realistic about that. But they've enjoyed several innovator awards because of the heavy reliance they put on the product. Hackensack is a pretty unique, pretty cool organization, totally vertically integrated, including a teaching hospital. And so not only do they utilize a full suite of products on the financials side, they use a similar suite on the HCM side, and they have campus solutions stood up and running in PeopleSoft as well. So we are lockstep with that strategy, as SpearMC is as aligned with the PeopleSoft product line as HMH is. Depending on the measure that you have, HMH is the largest healthcare provider in the state of New Jersey. It may bounce one or two, depending on if you're talking beds or patients served, what have you. These are the locations that that HMH currently is running across the state of New Jersey. From a SPRMC perspective, I mentioned we're all in on PeopleSoft. So when you look at the products and services that we do, and even the industries that we serve, healthcare, higher ed, financial services, public sector, these are the industries that have primarily adopted the PeopleSoft product as their ERP tool of choice. We've continued to be all in on PeopleSoft. Our alliance with Oracle, our partnership with Oracle has never been stronger due to our alliance on the PeopleSoft product line. So everything we do revolves around PeopleSoft, including anything emerging in technologies like Oracle Guided Learning. That's a cloud product, but we are the partner that works with Oracle to build out the Oracle Guided Learning for PeopleSoft content. So I'll show you some sessions that are coming up. I believe that someone in our group just did an OGL session. Might have been Logesh. Regardless, there are more coming, and I highly recommend you take a look at this. The Oracle Guided Learning, this would replace UPK. It would replace any, I don't want to steal too much of Cameron's thunder, but any of your manuals and training and your guides and you just take a look at what Oracle Guided Learning has. And I think you're going to fall in love with it like many of our customers already have. All right, enough about this. We are all PeopleSoft, all in. We've got our own products. Take a look at our website if you want to learn more. We are specialized. We're recognized by Gartner due to our specialization. Pretty excited about that. That's 3 years in a row now that we've received that Gartner recognition. SOC 2 Type 2 certified. And so we're a partner that knows PeopleSoft, knows how to work with PeopleSoft, whether it's hosted or on-prem. I hope you think of us as your go-to PeopleSoft partner. Okay. Oh, there's more. The public training. So excited to announce the latest curriculum in our training over the next 3 years. So November, December, January. We've made a significant effort in building out additional campus solutions training. We felt that there was a bit of a gap in the marketplace for training specific to campus solutions. We're not ignoring the technical tools, FSCM or HCM, but we have built out a robust training curriculum around all three. We recently revamped and rescheduled our system administrator training, which has been a couple of years now since we've seen that offered, certainly by SPRMC and even by other competitors out there in the marketplace. So take a look. If you've got your phone ready, you can go ahead and snap that QR code. You can see the calendar. If you want to go check out our website, that's going to give you a listing. I also have them added at the end of the presentation in an appendix. We're pretty excited about the curriculum that we have built out there for PeopleSoft training. So now let's talk about P2P, PTP, however you want to abbreviate it, optimization. So it's essentially in the procure to pay space, or even the vendor management space, we're seeing a lot of opportunities to improve on existing business processes, depending on the maturity of the organization and their integrations with contracts, their exposure to supplier self-service. Lots of opportunities and lots of features, functions, modules that Oracle has in the PeopleSoft ecosystem that many clients have either not even purchased or have purchased and not implemented, or didn't know these features existed and are missing out on an opportunity to deploy. So we've been really focused on talking to our specific customers about a roadmap on their procure to pay optimization. And we did this with Hackensack. And I'll talk to you about that journey and our solution and the phased approach that we've got. So why? Well, users want to modernize everything, PeopleSoft included. We did a transition onto Fluid, all Fluid at HMH when we did the expenses implementation in 2019, and when they started rolling out employee self-service on the Fluid platform before the pandemic. That grew during the pandemic, and ultimately now there's an expectation that everything is the modern look and feel, but we want to expand. We want it to be bigger. We want to streamline processes that happen maybe in Excel, a lot that do, processes for onboarding suppliers, for example, that were disparate and inconsistent and needed to be centralized and standardized. So the supplier self-service function was one of the keys that were going to be a benefit to be achieved when we did the PTP optimization at HMH. One of the goals, and this you'll see is still coming in a future phase, is to reduce the calls into AP and purchasing from suppliers, giving them the ability to go out and do their own inquiries on things like payments and purchase orders and acknowledgements and so forth. So these are the kinds of things that suppliers have been asking for, that employees have been asking for, and until we got into the opportunity to really blow out the supplier enablement functions, this was going to continue to be inbound phone calls into AP, and weeks before resolutions could be made instead of hours or minutes. We knew that this was going to be too big of a bite to take on all at once. We knew that phasing this was going to need to happen. And so we've got a phased approach. I'll talk about those phases and what we came up with as we built out the roadmap. And it's not just this project that was needing to be phased. If this was by itself, if there was never an upgrade, if there was never tools updates, if there were no other competing projects, we could have probably deployed everything at once. But it's never the case, is it? You have other things that are going on, things outside of PeopleSoft that are necessary. You might have unplanned acquisitions, and I'm not saying that happened at HMH, but those things happen that cause you to have to think about, if we can't do this at once, what can we do in bite-sized chunks to make incremental benefits possible, so that by the time we get to the end, we've enjoyed a synergy that didn't exist until we start chipping away. All right, so that was the plan. Lots of things going on before we initiated this. The supplier onboarding process was I don't know the right word, inconsistent maybe. There were systems that were being used, outside systems, but the problem is that the outside systems were able to use the process of basically evaluating and certifying suppliers, but it wasn't being done in the official system of record for suppliers, which is PeopleSoft. PeopleSoft is where the suppliers are set that are open for ordering and open for payment. And in order to get there, they need to go through that evaluation process. And without that process being in PeopleSoft, it became difficult to keep the synchronization between any external system and the system of record. There was also in our review a determination that while procurement contract functionality had been deployed, it had been deployed at a basically a shell of what it was capable of doing. It was essentially just set up for recurring voucher contracts, lease payments, rental payments, those kinds of things. And we missed the opportunity, the opportunity to enhance tracking spend at the contract level had been missed as we did our evaluation. I mentioned this before, AP and purchasing received a bunch of incoming phone calls because of a lack of visibility the suppliers have to the current state of a purchase order, a contract, a voucher, an invoice that they've mailed in. Lack of a visibility, and so calls kept coming in. Separate departments for just call intakes needed to be set up and managed so that they could handle the volume of suppliers trying to find out the status of particular situation, whether it be contract, purchase order, voucher, you have it. Okay, the contracting process and the RFP process was handled manually, right? So contracting was being done, as I'm sure is the case in many of the organizations that you folks are part of, by individuals. And these individuals tracked all of the statuses of the contracts, the redlining and everything offline. Maybe there was a SharePoint site. Maybe it was, we track everything in Microsoft Excel, the world's leading ERP system. Maybe none of the above, and each individual was responsible for tracking their own workload. Whatever the case is at your organization, at HMH, this was basically each desk had their own tracking tool. They attempted to combine it in SharePoint and have at least some visibility. This is the contracting process. On the RFP, RFQ process, likewise, handled offline, tracked in Excel. Actually, let me take some of that back. At HMH, they've moved away from using Microsoft Office as their standard, and they've moved to Google. So Google Docs, Google Sheets are what are used at HMH. So I keep saying Excel spreadsheets. Actually, Google Sheets is what was tracked and used for tracking the status of RFPs, the status of contracts, and so forth. Shared and shared on a open system so that anyone with access to that document could see it, but it still wasn't contained in a robust system with workflow enabled, such as PeopleSoft. What had happened over the years at HMH is the legal department wanted a contract management system to address what were identified as pain points above, but they wanted to use it for all contract types, not just supplier contract management. So physician contracts or contracts for clinical trials, all kinds of contracts that may or may not have had suppliers as the third party. Legal wanted a single system to track for that. That is still the problem. The solution, I'm going to jump to the last bullet here. The solution was legal decided they wanted to get a contract management system that would track everything, 100% of all contracts called Agileft. So we knew when that decision was made that we were going to need to integrate with Agileft from PeopleSoft on the purchasing contracts that we knew needed to be stored and maintained and managed in PeopleSoft. We also knew that there was a big pain point in just the management of suppliers in the system, new supplier requests. I talked about the process being a non-PeopleSoft process for onboarding. That we were planning to switch, to deprecate the current system and start to use PeopleSoft supplier registration for the onboarding. In order to do that, we needed to make sure that we addressed every requirement that was met in the existing system, some of which are certification, validations, and sanctions reviews. Okay, so we built the supplier registration through the public portal so that suppliers could be invited to register themselves, rather than all of that work falling on the few individuals in accounts payable that had to maintain every supplier that was entered into the system and the back and forth communications that had that. We also, in the first phase, decided we're going to enhance the use of procurement contracts well beyond just the recurring voucher contracts, so that we could have purchasing related contracts and the appropriate metadata stored, and we could track spend against those contracts in PeopleSoft. We could control spend against those contracts in PeopleSoft as well. We knowing that we had to integrate with a contract management system, we knew we were going to have to set up and deploy core functionality within the supplier contract management module. Okay, this we knew was going to be required for purchasing related contracts only. In other words, we weren't going to track things like non-disclosure agreements or business associate agreements. They're called BAAs in the healthcare space. In PeopleSoft, those would be handled in Agilon. We knew we would have to track and manage those contracts that were going to result in purchases, whether it was a price list or one PO for the entire contract, or a contract that could be consumed with multiple POs. We knew we were going to have to do that, and we knew without using the supplier contract management core functionality, we were going to lose some opportunity to capture the metadata that was needed for purchasing and the participants in the contracting process to evaluate whether or not that contract request should be approved or not. So we used the core functionality of supplier contract management for that. That was what we put into phase one. I think at the very end of my deck, I talk about what's in phase two. But I'll call out something that I want to make sure you understand on the supplier portal. Supplier portal has two main parts. There's the public portal, and then there's the secure portal. And the secure portal is where a supplier can go with a user ID and log on and actually see things like invoices, do inquiries on unpaid invoices, or when the payment is scheduled. They can also, with supplier contracts, participate in the collaboration process, redlining process of the contract. And when we deploy in phase two the strategic sourcing module, RFP, RFQ, they can use the secure portal to submit their bid. The public portal, which is what was in phase one, was used so that we could enable the supplier self-service during the registration process. Okay, that's I'll show you what that looks like now. Hopefully that makes sense. If anybody has any questions, which contract management system is used by HMH Legal is the question, and the answer is Agilon. This down here, Agilon is the name of the contract management system that Legal uses. So Agilon will be 100% of the contracts between HMH and third parties, and PeopleSoft will contain a subset of those that are purchasing related will be in the PeopleSoft space. Okay, keep those questions coming. Thank you, Patrick. Okay, details on the supplier registration. This is public portal. That's what we have in phase one, and we aren't posting a link that says become a supplier at HMH. It's by invitation only. Okay, and I'll show you how easy it is to send invitations to individuals This would be anyone in the purchasing department, AP department, that is aware that there's a new supplier that is looking to be added, and we're wanting to have that supplier go through the validation process. An invitation will be sent to them with a link, and in that link, they'll use the delivered activity guide process, okay, to submit to become a supplier. And then, of course, there's an evaluation process, an approval process. If they get approved, then there's a component interface at the end of that activity guide that promotes them to supplier status. The last few steps are we run the financial sanctions to make sure that they're not on the sanctions list. And assuming that goes well, then they get promoted, they get approved, and they get open for order. Okay. We spent a lot of time building the questionnaire because the questionnaire needed to address all of the intake parameters, all of those screening questions that were done either manually or through the system that was replaced. Okay. And so this was, I guess you would call it a agile approach, if you will, where we just kept going through the questionnaire over and over until we got to the path that made sense, the right steps followed by the right next steps. And at that point, we had the onboarding questionnaire that was adequate, capturing all of the required information so that we could then process through the system. Again, some credential screening is handled, I want to say manually, it's not, right? So once an approved supplier is out there, they're still not open for ordering yet in this current process. They have to go through the financial sanctions. And when they go through financial sanctions, then they can be set to be open for ordering. Okay. There's a few other sanction screenings that HMH is required to do. One, they have to make sure that this particular supplier isn't on a list that prohibits them from doing business due to Medicare fraud. Okay. And so there is some review that has to happen manually on those steps before they're flagged as open for ordering. And we're looking to other options to make that a more automated process right now. And I will say, in all previous circumstances, all systems, that effort was manual as well. So that's continuing. We did have some issues. If you do transition off a system like process Unity, Alaro, or third-party risk management. So we did transition. I don't think I'm able to say which system we transitioned off of, but we did transition off of the system that was using the intake process and doing risk management, and onto the PeopleSoft self-service supplier registration with the levels of review that were included in the approval. It met the requirements to enable the system to replace the prior system that was in place. I'll reach out to HMH and see if I'm allowed to discuss which system they came off. Not entirely sure I'm able to do that, though. If Gary was on, he could probably tell you. There is something that was pretty important in this process that we were able to resolve. And I apologize, I don't know all of the technical details behind this, but there was concern during the process when attachments were put out onto the servers, right? And you'll see a screenshot here. We're asking for W-9s and other certificates of, other types of certificates that they be virus scanned before we move them into an environment inside the firewall. And so the technical team was able to accomplish the virus scanning, much like they do through email virus scanning, inbound email. But that actually was a holdup for us for a period of time. We almost went live without this. We almost went live with the step requiring the supplier to email attachments like W-9s because the virus scanning existed for email. But we were able to, on the technical side, resolve the issue of ensuring that any attachments were scanned for viruses before they were introduced into the database at HMH. Again, if we have technical questions on how that was accomplished, let me know, and I'll get the technical folks from HMH to give us a more of a robust answer to them. It just happened. That's all I could tell. They pulled it off before we went live, so that was exciting. What does it look like? Well, I've mentioned that we manage invitations, so there's setup that I'm not going to bore you with here, but when you have your template set up, that questionnaire that is going to cover all of the required fields and functions and criteria that you need to set up and evaluate a supplier. And when that's ready to go from a self-service perspective, right, then you can do a couple of things. You could say, look, I'm gonna publish this link to anyone who wants to click on it that wants to be a supplier. Okay, that was a little too open-ended for HMH. What they wanted to do, they knew that they were going to gain tremendous efficiencies by having the supplier answer all of the questions instead of somebody in AP having to collect that information in email or phone calls and hand enter it themselves. They knew that was going to be a benefit. They didn't want to make it too open-ended for just anybody to find that link, click on it, and enter their information. And so we went live with supplier registration by invitation only. And what you do is you set up, as you know, anytime in PeopleSoft that there's a magnifying glass here, that means back in somewhere there's a setup that has to be done. So this required a supplier request template, HMH supplier, the email template, what's it going to look like when it sends it? That's all done in the setup. This supplier request template is where all those questions get set up. There's another one for a change request that's out there, which means you already have to be a supplier to be able to make a change request. And so these, we decide this is what we're going to send, and we just add. So the plus button here, we add any potential supplier. We add their company name, the person we're sending it to, their email, and we go ahead, save and send. And you, again, you actually click this, send, and then click save and send. And when you do that, Nancy here will receive an email with a link that says you've been invited to become a supplier at HMH, whatever we set up in the email template. And they'll click on the link, and that link will bring them to the pages where they can go through the pretty robust setup questions and answers. Okay, so boom, save and send. As long as there's a click, Nancy's getting an email, and as soon as she gets that, she can go to town doing the work. So she's going to get a link to this user registration. She'll click that. This is, by the way, the public portal right here. And she's going to do one of three things. She's going to be instructed to register as a supplier. When we do roll out phase 2, strategic sourcing, she may be asked to register as a bidder. Okay, a bidder isn't a supplier. It can become a supplier if they're awarded an RFP, but they don't have to be. And so the beauty is you can use the same registration questions that you have for supplier down here for bidder, so that if they get elevated, if they win the RFP, then all of the questions have already been asked and answered. But they don't fill up your supplier master as suppliers until you say they're suppliers. So until then, they may just be bidders. So you would use this if and when you roll out the strategic sourcing model. Now, user registration, if you are going to deploy the secure portal, where you give users, supplier users, the ability to log on and check the status of invoices, check the status of purchase orders, that's when you're going to have one sort of administrator set up for the supplier, and the supplier can come here and ask for additional users to be added to the supplier account. So through the secure portal, they can log on. There might be somebody in billing that just wants to see status of vouchers, or it might be someone who is going to respond to an RFP set up as two different users within the supplier organization. So this will come when we deploy the secure portal, and the different types of users will be driven by how much of the secure portal we want to deploy. Okay, we think it's going to be pretty much all of it. So we're going to click the supplier registration here. And when we do that, we're going to, it's basically an activity guide. Okay. And shame on us, this actually isn't the fluid activity guide. We still have a little bit of work to do to get through everything in fluid in this process, but you get the idea. It's six steps that we go through: the welcome, you define, you answer all of the questions, and you need to go through and answer all of the questions that are at least flagged as required before you're able to submit for evaluation. Okay. We hopefully have all seen what it looks like to step through an activity guide. This one is built to capture a welcome message, supplier identifying information. This is where all of those questions were added, where all of our qualifying questions are added. Okay. Oh, I got a question. Did you have suppliers that were already in PeopleSoft that needed to register? Yeah. So that great question. Great question there. I think it's Dan. The answer is we're still inviting them slowly, but suppliers that are already in the system don't need to register to become suppliers, right? And so right now that's all we've rolled out. But we do need to, once we roll out the secure portal, we do need to roll out and say, hey, right now you're our main contact. You're going to be the administrator. Do you want to participate? Do you want to be a part of the secure portal? And if so, you're going to be the administrator, and you're going to be in charge of supplier change requests. You're going to be in charge of adding new users going forward until you assign someone else to be. And that's going to be by invitation. So we're gonna start with the suppliers that need access the most, and we're going to do it pretty methodically. Okay. But right now we don't have to have suppliers register if they're already a supplier in the system, because all we're doing so far is registering new suppliers in the system. Okay. So we're going to say, boom, I'm asking to become a new supplier in the system, and here come our series of questions. And I didn't do a screenshot of every single question that's out there. I didn't have the time, but you could see every question that has an asterisk, that's required. You got to fill that out. What's your tax information? Oh, here, this is what we fix. Attachment, please attach, please provide your W-9 by attaching it here. We thought we were going to have to go live with a profile question that basically said, please provide an email and we will correspond with you in getting your attachment for your W-9, because attachment through email had the virus scanning. This is what our technical team, not mine, the HMH technical team, was able to solve for in this particular domain. So this domain is actually outside of the firewall at HMH, and then when it goes into the firewall, that's when the virus scanning happens. Okay, so you can see this scroll bar. I think as delivered, there's like maybe 3 or 4 profile questions. We went through the process, validating all of them, and I think we came up with maybe 35 to 40 questions. You can see we're still only a third of the way down the scroll bar here, as we're going through and answering all of the questions that were used and are used to evaluate whether a supplier is an adequate supplier to be added to the master in PeopleSoft, so that once this happens, they're allowed to contract, they're allowed to create purchase orders and start to use this supplier to do business. Okay, so lots and lots of questions that got asked. I'm going to step through. So get to the end. Now hit next, right? We were able to add a whole bunch of criteria that would be used in evaluating whether or not they may be eligible for special consideration during the RFP, RFQ process, right? Do they have any features like an ethnicity or small, woman-owned, veteran, disabled? All of these were added as additional reporting elements so that not only can we track the total spend on suppliers by these categories, we can make it a part of our evaluation. And ultimately, for this supplier, we can make sure that they get included in an RFP if we're looking to make sure that we have appropriate representation from small business or woman-owned and so forth. I think you get that. Okay. So once we get through all of that identifying information, we get to the addresses. Now, we didn't make a change here to the way Oracle delivers this. You get up to 3. In the first time you are creating a new supplier, you can have up to 3 different addresses. You can have the primary, and then if their remitting or invoicing addresses are different, you can click these check boxes here and you can add a different address. So you can have up to 3 addresses in the initial request. Once they're a supplier, you can start adding additional addresses. This is where the supplier change request is going to come in really handy, so that in the secure portal, I can log on, I can say, hey, here's all of our addresses. Here's everything that we want to use. Okay. So you can have one, you have to have 1, you can have up to 3, and that's delivered. Once they're in the system, then the limit is, there's no limit, just like there's no limit to manually entered suppliers today. Okay, we're just plucking along on the next button. And each time we do that, we're going to another stop on the train stop. This time we're adding contacts. And this is something I wanted to call out. Notice this down here, requested user ID is a required field. Okay, required field. My description, first name, last name, description, you know, wouldn't it help if you always put one? Not required. Flagging primary contact, you get warned. Somebody has to be the primary. So when you do the setup, you have to have one contact set up in the system. This is the person who's going to be emailed to tell them, hey, yep, your supplier is in the system, you're good to go, you've been approved, or your submission is pending. We'll let you know if it gets to the approval, that kind of thing. So why are we asking for a user ID here? Well, this is because if we deploy the secure portal, this primary contact is going to be the administrator for this supplier. And they need a user ID so that they can log on. And so what happens is they get generated a random password the first time. They have to change it the first time they log on. Then they'll be in the secure portal. And it's a secure portal where you can do things like look up invoices, acknowledge POs, respond to an RFP, that kind of thing. Okay. The first and primary is also going to be the administrator, and they can, if you remember that option, request additional users within that supplier so that those users can be part of those processes. Okay. So you have to have even if you don't deploy the secure portal, you still have to have a requested user ID here, because eventually if you do deploy, you're going to want to know who was that should be what user ID should be there for that user to log in. Okay, so that's contacts. I didn't do anything on the payment information page. Um, we struggle with this because there is banking information. There's information there that could be considered, um, I guess, sensitive, would be considered sensitive. We still do this at HMH. You might say, look, everyone's going to set up initially to be paid by system check, and only once they're a actual supplier in the system will we then do the banking information. Or you can say, look, I want everyone paid by ACH. You have to enter banking information here to be paid. It's up to you on how you do that. I didn't want to display anything on the payment information cycle, so I skipped that step. But trust me, you have to do something on that page, because if you don't, you won't have all of the information needed to be able to save this if this gets approved. All right, so now before we can go to next and actually submit, our button is grayed out. And it's grayed out because we haven't flagged this. You can't see it. This, I agree to the terms and conditions, and tiny customization that forces you to click that before you can check the checkbox, because the terms and conditions can be quite robust. Okay. And we highly recommend that you take advantage of the detailed terms and conditions that allow an outside party to get access to use the system, even if it's just the public portal to begin. Okay. So detailed, and this is limited only by your imagination, the terms and conditions that you can associate with that link. Once it's been read, the box is checked, and I can submit. When I submit, I'm not a supplier. I'm requesting to be a supplier. All of that profile information, all 6 steps, all the details go for the review of the approval. Okay. PeopleSoft workflow approval kicks in. Whoever it is or whatever group is responsible for evaluating submission of new supplier registrations will have it in their approval tile, and they can review everything that's there. And by the way, if they elevate this, if they say, yes, I approve, it becomes a supplier. That's when that component interface runs to create the supplier. Not yet open for ordering until financial sanctions are run and other sanctions are reviewed. When that all happens, they're ready to go. And I don't have a screenshot of this, but on the supplier record, there's a link to the profile questions. I can always click on it, and I can always see how the supplier answered those questions in the questionnaire. It's a part of the supplier record from that point forward. Okay. Whew. That was a big one. That was fun. Now, what do we do with supplier contracts and supplier procurement contracts? If you're on this call, hopefully you know the difference between procurement contract and a supplier contract. If I may oversimplify, the procurement contract is the transactional vessel for purchasing. The supplier contract is the legal terms and conditions, the actual contract that gets signed itself. Okay. Here was our issue at Hackensack, and this may be a similar issue to your organization. 90% of contracts that are procurement related contracts don't start on HMH paper. They start on the supplier's paper. The vast majority, I mean, it might even be 99%. Okay. And so there wasn't really a need to use the authoring function in the PeopleSoft supplier contract management. In other words, we didn't need to store all of the clauses and we didn't need to construct a legal contract. The supplier had already done that, most of that work. But the problem with the delivered, this is still a problem today with delivered PeopleSoft supplier contract management, is, I only have 10 minutes left, I'll talk faster. You can't invoke the questionnaire to capture all kinds of intake questions when you are requesting a new contract to be created unless you're authoring it. In other words, that super robust wizard that gets built in supplier contracts only works if you're authoring a contract. It doesn't work if you're importing that contract. We wanted it to be launched so that every time a new contract was requested that was purchasing related, all of the questions that needed to be asked would be asked and answered, and a log of those would follow the contract in its full life cycle. We also were able to use some of the answers to those questions as metadata for things like approval workflow or dynamically assigning who should collaborate on this particular contract. We tried, we didn't quite succeed in preloading the signatory, right? By determining through a series of various data who in the organization should be signing that contract. We came close, but we didn't make it before we went live. So there's still some work to do on that. But all of those questions that get asked in a questionnaire can only be done if the system thinks you are launching a contract to be authored. And so what we did was we built it so that with a customization so that the intake process creates that contract request with all of those wizards. We attach the actual contract at the end, and then we run behind the scenes an application engine that builds the procurement contract, transactional side, and the legal document, and it links them. Okay, all done within PeopleSoft. So the rule needed to be, if I'm going to start a contract and I know it is purchasing related, I'm going to start that intake process in PeopleSoft. And I'm going to click a little new contract request button we have, or a tile we have. I know the steps that I've got to fill in. I'm going to answer all of the appropriate questions. And if it gets approved, it might not, because you have to validate why this doesn't need to go out for RFP, right? It's called the bid waiver process. If I don't adequately state my case as to why I should go straight to contract instead of RFP, my request could be denied. Okay, but on review of my request, if it's approved, that's when our process runs and it creates the linked procurement contract supply contract. So it's a pretty slick process that we call the Sphere MC bolt-on. If you're interested in that, I could tell you more. The benefit of asking all of those questions, we have the metadata tracked and we can use it for approval workflow. Ultimately, we can use it to determine who the signatory should be. Now, signatories, the e-signature process, that doesn't happen in PeopleSoft. That happens over in Agilent, okay? But we've learned the hard way that Agilent needed us to tell them who the signatory should be, okay? And so that's why at this point in time, we have to manually, during the review process, it has to be manually added before we pass it over to Agilent. We'd like to have the system understand the metadata, understand the contract type and the department and the hierarchy and the dollar amount, all of the things that determine who is eligible to sign, and automatically insert that so that we don't have to do that manually. That's happening. Now that happens, now that we have these procurement contracts, supplier contracts there, once they're signed over in Agilent, so I'm skipping a whole process here, but after it gets approved, after it gets evaluated, redlined, and we say, you know what, this contract's good to go. That's all the procurement side. We haven't had the legal side yet. All legal redlining, all that happens over at Agilent. So we have to say, yes, I'm approving this to go over to Agilent. It's just straight up workflow approval. Once it's approved, it goes to Agilent. They do their thing, whatever that thing is, redlining, you know, throw this clause in, throw that out, and signature. That happens in Agilent. Once it's done in Agilent, it comes back as updated in PeopleSoft, fully signed, executed, and we can start buying against that procurement contract. The real benefit and the reason users should want to use this feature is if I'm creating an ePro rec and I'm coding it against an approved contract, I don't have to go through approval on my ePro rec anymore. It goes straight to approved if I'm using an approved contract. The benefit there is I get my things more quickly because the whole approval, the whole contract negotiation, everything happened before I created my rec. It's in place. I just buy against it and boom, my request is approved. Also, we can properly start tracking all of the organization's spend against the contracts that are in place. Because remember, before we had this in place, procurement contracts were only recurring vouchers. That was it. Now, any spend that is on a contract can be tracked and controlled so that we're not overspending against that contract in PeopleSoft, the place where all requisitions, purchase orders, all of that happens in PeopleSoft. So we've got much tighter control when this process is in place, and actually more expedient process when I'm buying against something that's an approved procurement contract. There you have it. That was the details. This is what it looks like when I request a new contract. I'm flying because I only have 3 minutes. I could either do the nav bar or the tile. We're going to add a document. It's ad hoc. I'm adding a contract request, right? And in that contract request, we have a bunch of required fields. Anything below this line here is what we call user definable fields. So you can have a bunch more. And when we hit create document, what we're doing is we're saying, I'm not going to import. I don't get my wizard questions if I do that. In fact, we've hidden that now from users. So we create the document. And when we do that, I get the opportunity to go through a series of wizard questionnaires. Okay. What kind of contract is it? Is the supplier already in the system? Hopefully, yes. Because if they are, then I find it and it pulls in their address for me. I've got a bunch of questions you're not seeing, but here's the bid waiver questions. Is it required? What is the reason behind this? What's the agreement number? Good. What you don't see up higher is we're asking what was the total contract amount, how much per year, how many years. All of those questions got asked and answered. We attached the contract. I don't have that shown here. We attach it here. See how it says modify? Before it said that, it says add attachment. We attach the actual contract. We submit it for approval. This submit for approval ad hoc is going to purchasing, and they're going to evaluate whether or not you actually met the bid waiver requirements. If you have, great. Then they're going to make the determination, I'm going to approve this request. The request gets approved. We run an app engine, and that's when the procurement contract and the supplier contract get built in PeopleSoft, and we can start internally negotiating with the supplier on pricing. Once that's done, it's ready to go to Agilent for the signature process. So that is, in a nutshell, what we have done in PeopleSoft and how we've integrated it into Agilent. So much. Phase 2, what are we doing? We're going to do the secure portal. We're going to give users the ability to log on. They're going to use Duo as a multi-factor authentication to make sure that any user that is approved with a Duo account that is linked to their user ID at HMH. We're going to deploy strategic sourcing. We've actually set it up. So almost everything in strategic sourcing is ready to go. But since we don't have the secure portal, we held off on deploying strategic sourcing so that when the secure portal is there, our suppliers and our bidders can actually log on and enter their RFP response within the secure portal. And then we're going to add more enhanced functions for procurement contracts, for amendments, which was a bit of a miss. Each team, Agilent and PeopleSoft, thought the other was handling amendments as we was going to pass them on. So there's a bit of a manual effort right now that was just a miss because we had 2 teams working at the same time, as well as the parent-child relationship. So in PeopleSoft, there's a function called group single supplier, where you create essentially a master services agreement. And you have the ability to have the legal document there. Since that doesn't count as a purchase order, we didn't build it in PeopleSoft. We're now realizing we do need to. There's a new intake for master agreements against which each new SOW would be a request for another SOW attached to the legal language of the MSA. So that's coming as enhanced functions for both procurement contracts and supplier contracts in the next phase. And I'm out of time.
That's fine if you need to take a few more minutes. That was an excellent presentation, and it looks like all of the questions have been answered. I don't see any, unless anybody has any right now, it'd be a great time to ask any wrap-up questions.
Yeah, there was, I think, maybe one or two questions on banking. The banking, it does, if you include that in the supplier registration, it does ask for their ACH bank information. So the bank ID, their account number and so forth.
Right. Naturally. Okay. Well, that was great. Thank you.
Well, I did a lot of talking.
Are you going to be posting this?
Yes.
Okay.
This will get posted, and yeah, we'll. You saw my my name and my email address. Here on the first page is my phone number. I think if it's not, I'm going to add it before I post it. You could reach me anyway, and I will absolutely be sure to respond to you.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of the week.
Okay.
Bye.